we just start, rather than water as our precursor to the hydrogen, we start with the waste plastic so that we can basically do some good for the world by getting rid of waste plastic that otherwise doesn't get recycled. We can take the 98% that doesn't get recycled and rip it apart and turn it into something useful. So the majority of the plastic is actually carbon. Carbon has been used for years, as diesel fuel and gasoline attest, by burning those fuels and turning out CO2 into the atmosphere. You get a good combustion reaction. So we instead turn that carbon directly into carbon black and what's called graphene, which is a two-dimensional layer of just carbon molecules bonded together, as well as carbon nanotubes, which are tubular, round-shaped carbon molecules all linked together and basically making up the most conductive material known in the world today.
My guest today is Ed VanDyne. Ed is an inventor, a visionary, and founder of over 5 startups. He is an inventor with over 40 patents and a research director of a Fortune 1000 company. He successfully sold plasma technology into Formula One racing and developed plasma technology while he was studying at MIT. Today in this interview, we discuss his new business, which is called Plastic to Green, and the goal that they're working towards of essentially being able to process any of the types of plastic that you might be familiar with. There's kind of those little labels with the triangle and the number on them on our plastic bottles. And a lot of the problem is that many of those types of plastic are not really recyclable in the way that one would expect. If you just put them in your recycling bin and send them out to the location, they usually just end up in the landfill. So he actually has a process which is able to sort of attack any of those kinds of plastic and break them down into their constituent parts. We also discuss his work with the Burning Man Festival and the float or sculpture which he created called the Dragonfly Mating Ritual. We'll see some pictures of that during this interview as well. And overall, it was a real pleasure to speak with Ed. I'm happy to have him back anytime. And without further ado, here's my interview with Ed VanDyne. I just wanted to start off by giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself and sort of what's your background. I understand you're working with a new business, Plastic to Green, and how did that get started for you?
First, I want to thank you, James, for having me on your show. And my name's Ed VanDyne. My background is I went to MIT and developed plasma ignition technology. And today we're now applying that plasma ignition and plasma combustion technology in a reverse fashion. We're actually using plasma to disintegrate and not combust plastic and turn it into the hydrogen fuel of the future. I can go into a lot more detail, but maybe we should go question by question.
Yeah, for sure. There's certainly just what you said out of the gate there about about disintegrating as opposed to combusting.
Correct.
I was hoping that you could go into more detail. There's a term which I found on your website,
Yeah,
which has a trademark to it, electrothermal dissociation.
correct.
Is that related to what you're
I thought
discussing?
it was backwards, but yes, it basically relates to using plasma technology. Plasma is just the fourth state of matter. So you create plasma, just like with an arc welder type of equipment. So there's lots of uses for plasma in the world today. And so we're using arc welder technology to be able to, in an oxygen-free environment, to break down plastics into their associated elements, not even their molecules. So we start by gasifying the molecules, and then we take those molecules and rip them apart into their individual elements. So we get the hydrogen out, we get the carbon out, we get whatever else is contaminating that plastic out. And so we get those individual elements, because matter cannot be created or destroyed, but molecules can be. And so we use that plasma process to pull apart those molecules and be able to get to their individual elements. And then our intellectual property is surrounded by turning that hydrogen, which is my least favorite fuel as a combustion engineer, and turning that hydrogen immediately into ammonia. And you do that by combining it with nitrogen out of the air. And so that turns the basically what I call dangerous molecule of hydrogen into a safe, somewhat inert, very smelly molecule called ammonia. Ammonia is the third largest manufactured chemical in the world today. So mankind makes, gasoline number one, diesel number two, and ammonia number three. And so it's very prevalent. It's out there. It's relatively safe because it doesn't burn at atmospheric temperature and pressure. And so we use that as the hydrogen carrier to be able to take hydrogen to the market. So right now, the U.S. is a big energy producer, and in the future will be a big hydrogen energy producer. But in order to get those hydrogen molecules to Europe or Asia or wherever, using preferably renewable electrons to create those molecules of hydrogen in the first place, which we do as well, we just start, rather than water as our precursor to the hydrogen, we start with the waste plastic so that we can basically do some good for the world by getting rid of waste plastic that otherwise doesn't get recycled. We can take the 98% that doesn't get recycled and rip it apart and turn it into something useful. So the majority of the plastic is actually carbon. Carbon has been used for years as diesel fuel and gasoline attest. By burning those fuels and turning out CO2 into the atmosphere, you get a good combustion reaction. So we instead turn that carbon directly into carbon black and what's called graphene, which is a two-dimensional layer of just carbon molecules bonded together, as well as carbon nanotubes, which are tubular, round-shaped carbon molecules all linked together and basically making up the most conductive material known in the world today. Is this graphene and carbon nanotubes. And carbon nanotubes are simply a circle of graphene bound together in different diameter circles, so or tubes, you might say. So we're basically making high value products out of this waste plastic in order to make a profit so that we can repay the loans from these very expensive factories or chemical plants that we have to build in order to absorb all of this plastic waste that nobody else takes today.
I see. And you mentioned 98% of the world's plastics. There, to my understanding, are various different types of plastic. So any consumer is familiar with seeing the circle, or the triangle on their bottle with a number. And how does that relate? Are there various kinds of plastics that fall into this that you can work with, or are they all plastics?
We can work with all plastics, and we're designing our essentially our chemical plant to be able to clean up the backside of no matter what plastic is coming in the front side. We can clean up the waste stream and have a zero emission, zero pollution, chemical plant.
Okay.
And so we spend a lot more money on the cleanup side than on the front end side, and so that we can handle no matter what's coming in on the front end, whether it's the yogurt container with the aluminum lid on it and the yogurt still inside the container. We can take that. We can take it with the paper label still on the container. And so basically what happens even with a Coke bottle, the plastic red cap is a different type of plastic. And so if the red cap is still on the Coke bottle, it gets kicked out as unrecyclable. We can take all of it, and we can even take what's called PFAS chemicals we technically are using what's called a medical waste treatment front end to our process, and that medical waste treatment it allows us to take anything that would be in a red bin, including a syringe, the blood. It basically makes all of those molecules inert, takes the metals out one direction, takes the silicone like broken glass. If that's mixed in with the plastic, we can take it and process it out the other direction, and then take all of the plastic molecules and rip them apart and turn them into useful products.
Fascinating. I think that's one of the major drawbacks, is that folks really aren't hip to where these various plastics traditionally can be recycled. And so you end up with what you're describing, which is we feel good about what we're doing, but ultimately a lot of what we're quote unquote putting in the red bin for the recycling or the blue bin is just going to the trash at the end of the day. So that's quite fascinating. Perhaps you could enlighten me. You're describing these refinement plants, more or less, these power plants. So how are you getting the energy to actually break down these plastics? Where's the energy to create this plasma originating?
We're using wind and solar energy as an input, and we're going to have lots and lots of batteries so that we can run through the night on stored up, but renewable energy. It can come through the grid, but it has to be grid certified renewable energy. And so we have to store it up during the day or in the night if it's windy, when they're produced. And we'll have our own solar field for each one of our plants, but we'll still be purchasing grid-based wind power because that comes from more of the windy parts of the country, like Wyoming. And so we'll be basically taking that renewable energy and using it to break down the plastics. Fortunately, our process uses less energy to break down the plastics than the plasma plume produces. So we'll be creating our ammonia, and if we run out of battery energy at 3 a.m, we can actually run on our own ammonia. We'll lose some of what we could sell as a product, but we'll be able to continue to run on what's called green electrons and be able to produce green hydrogen that has its own tax credit and its own benefits, as well as its own market where we can sell the ammonia in the future for twice the price you could sell it for regular fertilizer in this country if you sell it to Europe or Japan as green ammonia for what they are using for shipping fuel, for ammonia and fertilizer in Europe and other uses for the ammonia as a chemical. The green ammonia using green electrons demands a premium price. So we'll be able to make a profit and repay these billion-dollar loans we're going to need to put up these plants to be able to build more plants and consume more waste plastic in the future that nobody else is taking, and it's ending up in the Great Pacific garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean, or it's ending up in landfills. That's just doesn't always stay in the landfill. As I read an article 20 years ago, when it rains, the plastic in the landfill gets up and floats downstreams because it primarily floats. So it ends up being the stuff that escapes even the landfills and ends up polluting our rivers and streams and eventually oceans.
And I live behind a landfill, so I know exactly what you're describing. Yes, the Erie landfill, the mountain of Colorado, the small mountain. So I just wanted to clarify, when you're describing green electrons, my understanding is basically energy that's from a renewable source. Is that Correct. A fair estimate?
Correct.
Okay.
Green electron is wind, solar, hydropower, any kind of renewable electricity.
Geothermal even potentially.
Geothermal potentially.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I figured that was the case. But, and I guess the reason there would be a premium is just due to the desire from many countries to sort of push towards a better future for our impacts.
We could still use grid coal-fired power plant electricity to
Sure.
make do our process. And yes, we'd be getting rid of plastics, but we wouldn't be making the green premium on what we're making because we wouldn't be using grain electrons. So
Right.
the key, the key to a carbon-free future is not using, carbon energy to make the future non-carbon energy.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of folks with electric cars, they don't realize that a lot of times that energy is coming from still a non-renewable source. So that's great that you're incorporating that. I wanted to also ask you about, so you mentioned a couple of different products that you're able to produce, ammonia, and that's extremely important for any society, for fertilizers, but a lot of other products as well.
Sure.
But also that serves as a carrier for hydrogen as a fuel source.
Correct. Basically, ammonia as NH3 as a molecule just fits together, and you just pressurize it to about 150 psi, and it becomes a liquid similar to your propane tank under your barbecue. You've got liquid propane in that barbecue tank, which is why it can last so long. Whereas hydrogen stores as a gas when you compress it, but you have to compress it to a very high pressure. And hydrogen is the smallest molecule in the world, so it leaks out of everything. And it's flammable over a very, very wide range. And so having that flammability from a 2-to-1 mixture of air to fuel ratio to a 72-to-1 mixture of air to fuel ratio, it's ignitable over that entire range. Whereas ammonia is unignitable at atmospheric temperature and pressure, no matter what the temperature and pressure is, until you get to high pressure of an engine or something like that, or you break the ammonia back apart into hydrogen and nitrogen and use it in a fuel cell. Again, ammonia is going to be what's in the tank for the future of hydrogen transportation, for the future of hydrogen, energy as a backup source of energy. Ammonia is going to be what's in the tank, even if you're using hydrogen for the process of running the fuel cell or running the engine.
Okay. That's actually something that I didn't really appreciate the importance of ammonia until I think it was just 2 weeks ago, actually, when there was another gentleman who did a podcast where he actually has a theory about how the ancient Egyptians may have been manufacturing ammonia for their fertilizers. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole on that after reading that. I'm actually just going to go close my blinds here for a second because it's kind of making it hard to see. Just one second.
Go for it.
Thought we were gonna get a storm, but I guess it's sunny now, so that's good. All right, cool. Let's hop back into this. So we were talking about the various different products that can be produced, and I also wanted to ask you about. You mentioned the carbon black, and how you can make carbon nanotubes as well as graphene, and the ability of it basically being a extremely superconductor, right?
Yep.
So I guess for you getting started, which of these is going to be your main focus in terms of getting profit? Are you going to be focused on one of these, or is it really a confluence of all of this for you to make money?
The majority of the mass of what's the molecules that make up plastic is carbon. So the majority of what we're going to sell intentionally is carbon black. That's sort of the easiest thing to make. It happens automatically in our plasma process. So we will make an awful lot of this very fine carbon powder called carbon black. Fortunately, companies like Michelin and Bridgestone have been asking for recycled carbon black. They can't get it because they want it from recycling their own product. And unfortunately, they make such a good product that's so well stuck together. It's very difficult to essentially extract the 10% carbon black back out of a tire. It's
Right.
a very small fraction, and you don't end up, getting a lot for it, so to speak. Whereas with 70% of plastics being carbon, and we can easily extract that carbon and make the carbon powder that they're looking for to make future tires, we're in a unique position to be able to provide that industry with recycled carbon black as opposed to brand new carbon black, which obviously has a carbon footprint, you might say.
Right.
That's and so
Tire
being
track.
having a having a zero carbon footprint as a plant, as a chemical plant that we call ourselves, is going to have an added value, and not necessarily to get a significant premium, but even to just get the business at all. So even if we sell it for the same price as the competitor selling carbon black, the ability to get an offtake agreement for 20 years to be able to sell Bridgestone or Michelin, that what they're asking for, is very important to get the financing for our billion-dollar plant to be able to get that everything kick-started.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful to know that there are people that are already interested in your product, obviously. So I guess, did you know about this getting into it, that there was this need, or how did this idea come to you, and how did you realize that this process was even feasible?
Well, fortunately, as I said, I have a plasma background, and again, mostly from understanding the electronics of how to create plasma. So, not only, I invented a plasma ignition when I was at MIT, spun out of MIT, developed a company around that plasma ignition technology, and then we added technology to that high energy ignition that could sense combustion. And so when somebody asked me 2 years ago to look into what's the best way to make green hydrogen, I looked at, how you break apart water, and I found a couple of electrolyzer companies that break apart water and recommended the best electrolyzer company I could find. But I saw a company in California turning waste plastic into hydrogen. And I said, well, they've got the right idea, except that they're making hydrogen and compressing the hell out of it and trying to ship it around California to fill up, hydrogen cars and so on and so forth. And I said, well, what we need to do is make it immediately into ammonia. And so getting it from the plastic and making ammonia is going to be the safest and best way to utilize, what to do with all this waste plastic. And so I looked into the suppliers of the equipment, and the suppliers of the equipment that we need to break down the plastics happen to be suppliers of equipment that clean up medical waste, which is loaded with plastic and loaded with liquids, and which is effectively the same as food waste and on garbage, so to speak. And so the ability to take any kind of plastic is really what we're designing our process around. And now, preferably, we're going to get that plastic from what's called a material recovery facility. So all of your blue bin recyclables go to the material recovery facility. And unfortunately, 70% of the plastic they collect gets kicked off to the dumpster to go to the landfill. And so we're going to take that dumpster on the way to the landfill and take it for half the tipping fee, or we're just going to haul it away for them and take that off their hands and basically put that into our process so that we can generate, something positive out of that. And again, the positive profit from this process is really to just repay the $1 billion loan we have to borrow in order to build one of these plants. And then we need to go borrow another $1 billion to put up another plant. And each one of these big plants will only do 600 tons per day. Now that sounds like a lot to the average you and me, but in order to be 1/4 of the solution to all the plastic production in the world in 2050, we will need 1,666 600 ton per day plants. Now, as a little company, we're not going to get to 1,600 plants, but we're certainly going to try and finance and build as many as we can between now and 2050, because the world is depending on us, and somebody has to get this plastic out of our food supply. And right now we're eating on average one credit card's worth of microplastics per month
Yeah,
as
heard
a
that.
species. So that's pretty sad. And I'm not even going to explain how many different medical journals are coming out with what's the medical negative of microplastics in our diet. But there's a new article about a different problem every day. So
Yes.
the problem needs to be solved, and we're not going to be, we're encouraging every one of our competitors to help join in and solve the problem of plastic waste in the world. And, but it's going to take an army of plastic waste processing people to be able to even attack this problem, even in our own country, much less in the entire world.
I see. So there's a couple things I want to ask you about that. But firstly, so just taking a step back, what are some of the biggest hurdles besides the financing that you foresee? Are there any, obviously you've already kind of addressed the process of sort of reframing things from thinking about burning plastics to disintegrating plastics. But I do have to ask, are there any negative externalities that need to be accounted for in this process? What sort of things are you considering for that?
Basically, it comes down to what we have to invest in the back end of our plant to scrub out the negative chemicals. We're going to have PVC. Everyone's heard of a PVC pipe in their house. Well, in order to clean up PVC, which is 50% chlorine, we're going to make an awful lot of chlorine gas. And so we have to be able to scrub that chlorine gas and then sell it back to the people making PVC plastic, or whomever the market is for chlorine that's put in your swimming pool, or whatever, the other uses of chlorine. But we basically, it is our intention to make chemical plants that have zero emissions. So literally we don't leave anything out. We collect it all, we process it all internally, or we sell it to different suppliers. Even the oxygen that comes in with the water and food waste on the plastics, the oxygen will be processed out, collected, and sold back to somebody who's in the market of selling oxygen to hospitals and whatever. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it needs to be cleaned up and processed with whatever the microfiltration has to be to ensure that oxygen is pure enough for a hospital, but that's not our job. We'll just sell them the raw oxygen that we produce. We'll sell the raw chlorine that we produce. We'll even have fluorine from, I don't know if you've heard of PFAS chemicals, but they're fluorinated hydrocarbons, which are now called forever chemicals. Because they last forever. A typical piece of plastic will break down in 300 years in the environment, but a PFAS chemical takes 3,000 years to break down in the environment. And so that's primarily what's making up the microplastics floating around in our bodies, because they last forever and they don't break down. Our stomachs can't break them down. And so they end up floating around in our bloodstream. And recently, when they tested heart attack patients and took the blockage out before they put the stent in their artery, they basically analyzed the blockage as being over 50% microplastic.
Wow. So
that was in two days in a row, one study from the US and one study from Europe, literally 2 days in a row, that was in the news. And from across the world, it doesn't matter where you live anymore, the microplastics have blown in the wind, partly because our water treatment plants have nothing that they can do with what's called their sludge. So they just spread the sludge on a field. Of course, that sludge dries up, and those lightweight little plastic particles just blow away into the wind, which is why we're measuring in as far away as New Zealand is measuring 1,000 parts per meter per hour of rainfall,
Of
right?
plastic?
Of plastic that's measured in the rain. And so it's blowing in the wind, and we're poisoning ourselves with it because everybody thinks of these forever chemicals as what you would call inert. Well, that's turning out to be completely false.
Right.
Yeah, they turning out to be in our bloodstream and in our bodies. They're not inert molecules, and that was a lie, presented by the plastics companies, that these are, forever not going to harm you chemicals.
Right. I've even heard that reproductive rates have been affected by things like that.
Yeah,
So, yeah, there's a woman, Dr. Shanna Swan, who's gone into a lot of detail there.
I can
So, I'm
think
curious,
of
do you have, are there any, you mentioned that it's going to cost upwards of $1 billion to manufacture a single one of these plants. Would there perhaps be any technological advancements that you foresee coming down the line that could substantially or in some way maybe impact your ability to make these kind of plants? Is there anything that you're
well,
anticipating that could really speed that up?
um, I mean, lowering the price isn't necessarily going to speed it up because we have to do the right thing with our scrubbers and do everything chemically correct. The other thing we need is a $300 million solar field for each one of these plants. And so, the approximate price tag estimation at the moment is about $600 million per plant, of which half is just the solar field to power the plant, right? In order to make sure that we're using green electrons. And I guess some of that 300 million goes into the batteries that store all that solar energy so that we can run through the night on our solar field, so to speak. So that's really critical to invest in doing the plants correctly up front. And in this country, you have to do it correctly just in order to get the tax credit that's going to pretty much pay for all of our renewable electrons, is going to be repaid in tax credits for making green hydrogen in the first place. Obviously, we're turning that green hydrogen directly into ammonia so that we can safely sell it, and transport it away to whoever would be our customers for buying ammonia. And we're talking to chemical companies. There's even urea foam insulation is made using ammonia as a critical component of the manufacturing of the urea foam. But they, as of yet, don't have a way to recycle that foam into something other than chop it up and make it into the padding underneath carpeting, right? Which pretty soon, when enough of this urea foam starts to get forcibly recycled, they're going to run out of the market for making foam padding for carpets.
Right.
And so basically our process is unique in its ability to take the urea, turn it back into ammonia. They can sell it right back to the manufacturer of the urea foam, which obviously you have your mattress to be comfortable for sleeping. You obviously want your car seats to be comfortable for sitting on for long distance driving, right? And so that's the value of these plastics, but they're difficult, to recycle. And so we're upcycling or repurposing those molecules and getting them back into a form that can be used by the industry and essentially allow them to show where their downstream waste stream from their process is getting properly processed. And again, keeping plastics out of the landfill is now a major source of regulation that's going on. And manufacturers, even, Coca-Cola and all the food companies are being, told they're responsible for their own recycling of their own packaging. Well, in order for that to happen for, a Dannon yogurt container, we're going to be the only people who can take it, because there is no other process that can take a Dannon yogurt container and plastic food waste aluminum lid entirely and be able to process that back into aluminum and to sell to the aluminum, makers, plastic or ammonia and carbon black to be sold to the tire manufacturers. So it's, again, trying to make a circularity out of what people are, have a lot of hype and buzz about the circular economy, but it's impossible to do with certain, certain products today because, a yogurt container is a mixture of paper, plastic, food waste, and aluminum. Mm-hmm. And nobody else's process is so far designed to handle that as a process.
Okay. Yes, there's kind of right now the circle has a big hole in it and we can't figure out how to jump that bridge, but this process seems to be able to do that. Hi there. I hope you're enjoying this interview with Ed. Just wanted to jump in and say thanks a lot for checking this out. It really means a lot that you would take time out of your day to listen to these interviews. Hopefully you're finding something new from this or learning something or maybe just getting inspired for your own work. Whatever the case may be, want to give you a shout out for checking out the James McConnell Show, and let's get back into the interview. Yes. So you mentioned that so much of your upfront investment is going to come from just powering the plants in the first place. Mm-hmm. What consideration, I'm sure there's a lot of externalities that have to be considered here too, but have you considered the possibility of using nuclear power?
Absolutely. Basically, they just changed the colors on you. Basically, pink ammonia is made from nuclear power, which is certainly a possible backup power to our plants for, when we run out of wind and solar. Obviously, when we produce pink ammonia, we won't be able to collect the hydrogen tax credit on that. And so it will allow our plants to run 24/7, and it will create at least a demonstration that it's a zero carbon ammonia, even when it's labeled pink instead of green. And so it's always possible to use whatever power is available in order to ensure that we can stay up and running 24/7, which is beneficial, again, mostly to the plastic cleanup process that needs to go on en masse in order to, basically start to solve this health crisis we're in.
Right. 600 tons for one plant, but what you said about having the need for at least, I think, 1,600 plants, doing that number.
A quarter to only 1/4 of the expected plastic production in 2050.
Yeah, I definitely can't afford any downtime there. That makes a lot of sense. No. So where are you in the process of putting this business together and getting this plant in production?
We have our patent filed on the process of converting the waste plastic directly into ammonia. So that's been filed, and we're working on talking to some other people about licensing specific technology. We're meeting with our suppliers to be able to, basically figure out how they can handle the purchase order. When we go, we have the potential, we don't have it yet, but we have the potential to get a hydrogen loan from the Department of Energy. And if we get that loan, we're going to be buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment from suppliers. And so getting those suppliers lined up so that we can use their engineering expertise to help us design these major chemical plants that have to be built. And here we are, a startup, and we have access to the hydrogen loan program, but we have to take our technology from a TRL, or technology readiness level 5, and take it to technology readiness level 8, in which it includes building a pilot plant here in Colorado. And by getting it to that technology readiness level 8, then we can apply for the hydrogen loan. And so we have a lot of work to do as a company. We're raising money now. We're just finishing up an angel round, and we're in the process of trying to raise our $5 million first venture round here by this November.
Fantastic. Yeah, this definitely seems like something. You mentioned that you could get a hydrogen loan from the Department of Energy. I mean, there's definitely a lot of money being thrown around in the government. It certainly seems like that's kind of up their alley. So, I guess, are there other departments besides energy that would be a
Well,
group that
we're
you'd be
already
looking to?
talking about to the Department of Defense. They have a problem with PFAS chemicals because that's what's in fire extinguisher foam. And so there's an awful lot of fire extinguisher foam left around military bases that have poisoned the water and other problems that they're now getting sued for every day when you look at the television and what lawyers are asking veterans to
You're right.
call them for money.
Yep.
Anyway, sad but true. But again, that was the false premise that these chemicals that were produced by 3M and DuPont, to say just the top two, because they've both been sued and lost in court on both counts. So I can use their names.
Yep.
But basically, they've made these forever chemicals that now are very, very difficult to clean up. And that's one of the values of the process that we're using, because our process uses 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit plasma, like an arc welder that you use to put metal together or take cut metal apart. We're using that plasma technology to be able to disintegrate these plastics, including the forever chemicals, and breaking them down into their base elements, and then utilizing and selling those base elements back to the right industry. The fluorine is probably the one that's probably not going to get sold anywhere. It's going to get dumped so that it doesn't go back into more forever chemicals.
Right. Okay. So transitioning slightly from kind of the details of your business, this is not the first company that you've been a part of and the first company that you've started. What has been the biggest surprise for you with your business here with Plastic to Green as opposed to some of the other ones?
This is the first one that has really total support. I've never had a business that I've started where every single day there's a news item that's saying you're going in the right direction, you're doing the right thing. Usually I'm 20 years ahead of ahead of time with my inventions, and now it's like, oh, you're 20 years behind.
We all are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's an article every single day as to why you have to move as fast as humanly possible to make this happen, because the world is depending on it, so to speak. The health of the world, the health of the planet, the amount that the microplastics, everyone's jokingly saying that there'll be more plastics in the ocean in 2040 than there are fish, and that's complete bullshit. There's already more microplastics than fish by multiple orders of magnitude.
Wow.
And so we've polluted our oceans. And the fish don't know any better. When they see sort of some little shiny object in the water, they're trained, by habit, by nature in the past. You go eat whatever they can visually see as a little lump of whatever. And so, they're actually analyzing fish as being a certain percentage plastic, and so that's why when we eat the fish, we are eating the microplastic that we've fed to the fish. And it's very sad situation, and it's got to be changed through both regulation as well as through a profitable process in which to remanufacture this waste into something of use. And the fact that at least the plan is for what's going to replace carbon fuel in the future is going to be hydrogen, and the way hydrogen is going to get to the market is via ammonia. And it's just we're in the right place at the right time, and I've never had sort of so much synchronicity of an invention that was done at the right time in the right place, and huge amount of support. We have a team of a dozen wonderful team members on the team already, all working voluntarily for stock options to be able to make this company a success. And so it's exciting to work with the team. It's exciting to work with, all these chemical companies calling us now, seeing our website and saying, we need you to solve our problem because we're in the business of making, urea foam for mattresses and car seats, but we need you to help us, clean up our back end, clean up our problem, a mess that we've created over time by being such an efficient manufacturer of the front end. There has to be a back end cleanup company, or else.
Right. Wow. Yeah, the fish eating plastic, it kind of gives a whole new meaning to rubber duckies, I suppose. So you mentioned that you have a wonderful team, and I understand that you've been a part of many teams, even not so much in necessarily a venture meant for profit, but also as something kind of very different, which is being a director for a sculpture at Burning Man. I was just curious, what are the similarities and differences between doing something like that, which a lot of people see as being kind of a chaotic, disorganized type of event, to something where you have a business like this? I assume it's probably not that perception, but what has it been like for you?
Great question. It's been actually somewhat similar. I mean, when I put a volunteer team together to do the Burning Man sculpture, it was the second year doing a sculpture for Burning Man. We got a $20,000 grant, but we spent over $40,000 building and expenses to get to Burning Man. And so, but it was organizationally, it was a job. It was work. We had to organize the team as to when they were coming to work on the sculpture, when they were, coming to, put in the hours so that they could get a ticket to Burning Man. And that's all that we could offer to, pay for their efforts,
Right.
was a ticket to Burning Man. And so, it was a wonderful experience, and a wonderful experience about, it's just a very similar management. You have to inspire people to work for free. And right now, that's sort of what's happening right now. Obviously, we have a company and we have stock options to try and motivate people so that someday this company will be worth something huge and those stock options will be worth something. But everybody is doing this for the sake of their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren, because this is a problem that has to get solved, and has to get solved as quickly as possible. And it's a very similar situation with Burning Man in that you have basically to do your sculpture and you have to deliver it to the playa within, in the time allocated. Because if you miss getting there early, you're going to be in the 24-hour line to get in, and then you're definitely not going to have your sculpture built in time, and so on and so forth. And so just showing up to the playa a week and a half early, and do that on time is a major undertaking. And we had 23 people on our team, only 16 tickets to go to Burning Man, and everybody pulled together in order to get the sculpture out there behind in the two trailers behind two mobile homes that were ancient and needed to be fixed on a daily basis as we were driving out there, and so on and so forth. So trying to do Burning Man on a tight budget was fun and challenging, but in the end very rewarding when we're driving home sort of, feeling very dirty and tired at the end, and then finding out we got into Rolling Stone magazine, and a picture of our sculpture in Rolling Stone magazine was sort of like, it made it all, all the work and tiredness and all the, driving home totally dusty from playa dust.
Yep.
Well, worth it in the end, to be able to show off that article in Rolling Stone magazine.
Yeah, I'll be linking that here, and I definitely have some pictures of that. And I assume that the 7 people who didn't have tickets, you just snuck them inside the sculpture, and that's how they got in, right? Trojan horse style.
No, one whole family had their own work to do. They were part of like a hair washing. What do you call it?
Yeah, because everyone has to bring some sort of
everyone has to bring something that
some
they
service.
Get.
Right. Yeah.
And so they did a hair washing service, and so they were part of that crew. and they didn't have much to do, so they did artwork on our artwork, up until Burning Man. Then they left a month early to go set up their hair washing tents and things like that for Burning Man. And so they were, their artworks was hanging on the Mobile art piece, for the entire week. So it was exciting to work with all these artists, some of which again had their own tickets, some of which could have had tickets and could have shown up and decided not to go because they wanted nothing to do with the playa part of going to Burning Man. They were happy to contribute to the artwork piece. And I'm a vice president of a creator space in Loveland called the Loveland Creator Space, and so some of the volunteers on the team were just part of the creator space and wanted to volunteer and help make this thing happen. And then they just wished us farewell as we drove off, to go set it up in the desert. So it was a heck of a team effort and a heck of a learning experience about how much sort of, effort it takes and how much teamwork it takes to do anything like this. And so doing things to acknowledge and support the team is really, part of what we did and so we had to cook 240 meals, more than that, probably almost 300 meals for the team,
Right.
and freeze them all before even going, right?
Yeah, and the water alone, just the supplies.
The supplies of water and the ability to then get service at Burning Man, and so it was just on and on. It's a whole enterprise unto itself to be able to build a piece of artwork and get it out there, and and feed a team of 16 while you're out there. And
Right.
of course, there's always squatters, you might say, who
Sure.
come in and say, "Oh, you're having a really nice dinner. Can I have some of that?" Oh, okay. And so you end up invariably having, an extra 3 to 5
Some
members
guests.
of a dinner every night, and it makes for good camaraderie and good learning and good social, interaction. And it's hilarious how many people sort of show up with, 5 gallons of water, and that's all they show up to Burning Man with, and a tent. And then, they basically go meet people and get fed that way. And you can actually read the book, and you probably could get breakfast, lunch, and dinner at Burning Man, by just reading the book as to who's serving pancakes this morning and who's serving lunch, because there's one camp that serves, what's it called? Grilled cheese sandwiches.
Oh, nice.
Every day at lunch. And so that's the camp to go to for lunch. And so technically you could eat 3 meals a day at Burning Man without showing up with a single supply.
Once again, a whole new meaning to sandwich as well. So there we go. We got 2 in a row there.
Well, that's you can't call it sand. It's dust, and
Dust.
It's dust, not sand. It's hilarious.
That's funny. I've never had the chance to go, but I definitely would be interested in that. I want to ask you about your creative process. You're a very creative person, but before I do, I'm also curious. Burning Man is known for, just kind of a lot of things that are kind of over the top and out of this world. Have you, not necessarily at Burning Man, just in your life, have you experienced anything anomalous that you couldn't explain? A lot of what I'm interested here is about kind of the liminal spaces of consciousness and things like that. And as a creative person like yourself, I find that many folks in the similar kind of mindset have experienced, maybe it would be one thing or many things that have kind of steered them. Do you have anything like that?
I guess I was actually contemplating this very question sometime recently. I can't say, within the last week, and thinking about sort of, what am I grateful for? And when I was a kid, I couldn't read because I had dyslexia. And so basically I got really good at guessing. And guessing turns out to be really good at creativity, coming up with answers that people ask when, I just literally knew at the moment I just made it up. And the funny part is, basically I got really at least good at convincing myself that I must be really good at guessing because I pretty much get the answers right an awful lot when I've never read a book. And so I didn't read a book cover to cover until I got to college. And it was actually Conan the Barbarian that got me into reading, partly because by that point I had somewhat outgrown my dyslexia and inability to actually put sentences together. So fortunately, the crisscrossing of letters had sort of slowly dissipated over somewhere in my teen years, but I was still incredibly slow at reading. And so I still had to, I took every speed reading class there was and still never got up to sort of average reading pace. Basically, I can read as fast as I can talk. I can't still, as of yet, can't read faster than I can talk. So that, ability to guess is really, what I would do for English in order, because for me, I had to my mother was a teacher. I had to minimum get a C. So even in English class, I would just read the first chapter, the last chapter, and the title of every chapter in between and make up a book report. But it was the creative process that allowed me to create a book report about something I could only sort of infer, and in order to get it done in the time frame that you had to get all your homework done in. So it just became something that I became a good guesser and a good creative person relative to needing to make stuff up in order to get through school.
Fascinating. Intuition and inference are highly underrated in this society, I think. There's in my opinion, I feel like potentially humans have abilities in these spaces that we're almost taught to ignore to an extent where we kind of, a lot of children are capable of those kinds of things. And I'm not sure the science behind it, but there certainly seems to be some juice to that squeeze. But you mentioned yourself as a child, and one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, given the extensive career that you've had, what advice would you want to tell your younger self if you were to go back in time and sit down with them, not rewriting the past, but just what advice do you think young people would value hearing?
Believe in yourself, and believe that the answers are out there, but also ask for help. I saw a really good interview and I realized I probably didn't do enough of asking for help when I was younger. And when I saw an interview of Steve Jobs talking about how when he was 12, he found, I forget what his first name is, but Mr. Hewlett's from Hewlett Packard's phone number in the yellow pages in San Jose, California. He called him up at 12 years old and says, "Can you help me with some parts for my, some electronics thing he was building?" And he said, "On one condition." This is Mr. Hewlett talking. On one condition, you come to work for me this summer. And so Steve Jobs worked on the assembly line, making those things he was trying to make at home from, because, Mr. Hewlett sort of took him under his wing. And so you wonder why, Steve Jobs sort of did what he did, whereas he had no qualms, calling somebody famous in the phone book and asking for a favor. And so that's really what I would recommend to myself, is, figure out what you want to do and go do it and go ask for help in getting it done.
Right. Yeah, I've kind of had a similar experience where, I don't know, up until more or less the last couple of years, I just didn't really think, who's going to listen to me, right? Who's going to value my question or my perspective on something? But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter how old you are. There's kids that are 12 going to Stanford, right? And they just decided that's what they wanted to do, and they achieved it. So I think anybody is capable of that. Within, not everybody's going to be a 4-mile sprinter, 4-mile minute sprinter, but we all can figure out how to run fast, at least for what we're capable of. So,
and the other thing I would recommend is, is find your passion and your mission for what you want to do. I mean, I've been annoyed ever since I read that article about plastics getting up and floating out of landfills, and I read that 15, 20 years ago. So when it came up that somebody said, hydrogen is it, how are we going to make hydrogen? And I saw this company in California making the hydrogen. Obviously I knew not to make hydrogen, being a combustion engineer, having that training, and make it ammonia immediately. And it turns out nobody else had, put that IP together. Nobody else filed that IP before we did. And so we did extensive patent searching, because I just thought it was a simple, obviously that's the idea. If you're going to make hydrogen, you got to make it all the way to ammonia right away so that you make it safe again, right? Hydrogen, from my perspective, is an unsafe molecule. I mean, the joke is the Hindenburg, but the Hindenburg was 100 years ago. There have been many, many more, hydrogen, problems.
Catastrophes.
Well, again, I started out earlier in the conversation talking about how wide a range of combustibility it is.
Right.
But at a 2-to-1 mixture to a 5-to-1 mixture, it explodes. It burns so fast that it's an explosion. So basically, you blow up buildings, you blow up whatever. Whereas if it's a 50-to-1 mixture to a 72-to-1 mixture, where it's still ignitable, it burns invisible. So now you have a fire in your factory or whatever, and you can't even see it. You have to have, infrared goggles or some way of seeing heat to be able to know that you have a fire in your factory. I mean, those are the kind of things that make hydrogen so darn dangerous.
Wow, I did not know that. That would be the worst way to go, getting burned invisibly, I think.
Right. Oh, that's
Dang.
neat. Why is it hot here?
Right. Yeah. Jeez. I got to look up a video of that thermal scope for that. That's cool. One thing that I definitely wasn't planning on asking you about, but since you mentioned that you went to school and you studied plasma physics, I wanted to ask you, there was a book that I recently read that sort of floated the concept that certain plasmas, not all plasmas, particularly kind of when you zoom out and you look at the nebulas in space and how those are plasmas, and how a lot of the similarities to what you kind of observe at that large scale, for example, mirror the interactions of the neurons in the brain. Did you ever, when you were in school, did anybody ever propose the concept that certain plasmas might actually be a form of life, not necessarily sentient life, but just some form of a life?
No, I've heard that theory before, but I've never sort of dug into it.
Okay.
There are, I would say, infinite forms of plasma, because obviously in the vacuum of outer space, I mean, all a plasma fundamentally is the fourth state of matter, which means you have enough electrical charge to be able to essentially keep other molecules out of that zone or whatever. It's sort of like it's so electrically charged, nothing else wants to occupy that same space. Now, in the case of what we're doing it at a very high temperature, but you can there's now scales of temperature, all the way from plasma that's done at absolute zero to plasma that's done at 10,000 degrees. And we're in the 10,000 degree category. That's what I know how to make and how to do electrically and how to do efficiently electrically. And so that it can be done efficiently with, solar energy, and not, essentially necessarily need a nuclear power plant to power our operation, which again, at some point I just assume every nuclear power plant run one of our plants also, because we need to destroy that much plastic in the world and get it out of our environment. But for the most part, even a nuclear power plant has plasma inside, whether it's a fission or a fusion reaction.
Right.
They're certainly talking a lot about high temperature plasma, like what I know for fusion reactions.
Yeah, containing
hydrogen,
the explosion. Okay.
The explosion, the hydrogen bomb explosion from happening and still releasing energy that's useful, as opposed to an explosion. And so, high energy plasma, it can be done with electricity. It can be done with lasers. It can be done with static electricity. So you just sort of rubbing your feet on the carpet and touching the doorknob that gives you a shock. That's a plasma because it's the same as the lightning in the sky. And the lightning in the sky is created from water vapor, right? So why are those water molecules rubbing together in the sky enough to put out a lightning bolt that has, megajoules of energy in it? That's just created from, water molecules rubbing together in the atmosphere. And so it's sort of like it's a very complicated answer. So I guarantee to some extent life was created with the benefit of plasma because we've had lightning on Earth for millennia, for the existence of Earth.
Right.
As long as the Earth has water on it, the Earth has created, clouds, and clouds have created lightning, and lightning can, essentially create the building blocks of life.
I see. Well, thank you. That was, I've never gotten the chance to speak to somebody with your background, so I wanted to throw that in there.
You really,
So
my creative answers to.
No, it's a good answer. It's compelling.
Yeah.
Is there anything, we're kind of at the end of our time here. I want to respect your time, but is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wanted to make sure that we touched on today?
I guess back to the creative process. For me, the creative process is simply today, give me a problem, I'll give you a solution, because I'll give you 5 solutions and you can pick whichever one you like the best. And so to me, I'm just glad that I never sort of lost that ability to sort of combine ideas, because I may understand plasma from MIT, but I learned the plasma physics from the strobe light laboratory at MIT. Because a strobe light is actually a plasma that's inside a tube, and that was invented in the 1940s by Doc Edgerton. And I showed up in the plasma physics laboratory, or the strobe light laboratory at MIT 40 years after the invention of the strobe light, and said, how do I make a strobe light do this? And basically the technician that had worked for Doc Edgerton, who had recently passed away before I showed up, the technician told me how they made strobe lights work in the 1940s. But that, he said, that's not how you would do a strobe light today, because now we have modern diodes, and you just use a diode instead of a saturatable core transformer. And so it's sort of like, well, okay, I don't have to do it the way they did it in the 1940s, but the combination of a strobe light and an ignition circuit, both of which had been invented in the 1940s, combined in the 1990, combined into an invention. Mm-hmm. And so because it hadn't been combined before. And so it's really, the creative process is really about going in search of answers to questions. And, it was a lot of fun to go and get challenged by the head professor, doctor of Bosch, on why my ignition system was a breakthrough, and he pounded the table asking me questions for 2 hours, and he finally pounded the table at nearing the end of 2 hours, and I only had 4 overhead slides left, and he pounded the table and said, "I like it." He actually came up with something that we missed at all of Bosch, and so to have the professor doctor of ignition at Bosch say that, after 2 hours of grilling, that I actually came up with something useful in my creative imagination of combining, the PhD thesis that Bosch had funded together with the strobe information in the strobe light laboratory to make something that would actually, revolutionize, or could revolutionize car ignition, was pretty positive. And that whole creative ability is sort of like, just go be curious, go find the answer because somebody has it, and it's really about, asking. And I finally learned to do that, when I got to MIT. But it was the atmosphere of learning was so exciting at MIT. The opportunity to walk into Dr. Bose's office and talk about sound was just, his door's open. I walked in and talked to Dr. Bose, and I didn't have anything to do with,
Right.
being in his class or anything. It was just talking about sound waves and the physics of sound waves, and talked to Dr. Bose for 2 hours for absolutely no reason. And so something, the whole light bulb flipped when I was at MIT, because it's such a sort of positive place for education and learning.
Yeah, what you're describing, I think of the analogy of music and how we have the same notes, but people remix those notes in a novel way for every new song
Yep.
within a set of constraints. And what you're describing is kind of what I hear is putting together things that seem like they're not related and finding ways that you can create new ideas through that. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah. The way we're using what I learned at MIT and did for 14, 15 years as my career, I'm learning how to do not combustion and using all the same tools.
Right.
It's sort of like using the same tools to not combust plastic and not incinerate plastic, just turn it into molecules we can, use in other ways, and find a use for all these molecules that are polluting our world today.
Well, that's a really valuable service that you're providing, and I wish you the best, and I'm definitely interested to see kind of where this proceeds. Maybe once you have some big developments, maybe you get some funding or start working on that power plant, we'll have you back on and we can get some more details.
We'll bring you to our Colorado pilot plant and show you around.
That would be lovely. Well, thank you so much, Ed, for your time and for walking me and the audience through the work that you've done with Plastic to Green and also with some of your other projects. And we really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your show. I look forward to talking to you in the future.
That's going to do it for my interview with Ed VanDyne. Hopefully you got something out of this interview. And if you're still here, I have to assume that you must have. And I really appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to this. If you're still sticking around, consider subscribing to the show. I've got a couple other interviews that I'm lining up and many more that I'm in the process of getting scheduled. Definitely looking to continue this as long as possible and grow this show. I'm also working towards some more longer form, highly produced film, documentary type of videos. Some things that dive into the science and engineering potentially behind how to use electricity to manipulate gravity. There's actually a wide body of interesting history to that I've been researching, and I'd like to share that with you. So without further ado, I will see you in the next one. Thanks for checking out the show.